Without further ado, I'd like to say thank you everyone for attending the UHEI webinar today, and apologise for the platform change from Zoom over to Teams, but hopefully going forward, this is the new platform that we'll be using, as it will be more accessible for NHS and universities attending. So without further ado, again, I'd like to introduce Henry Majed, who is our co-founder, is the co-founder and CEO of MyMynd, not of Ascent Events, of MyMynd, and is a great friend. And Henry will be chairing the session and introducing all the speakers. And just before I hand over again, I'd just like to say a big thank you to Inenco for supporting this webinar. So thanks, Henry.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Guy. You call it chairing. I think I'll be having the most fun, just so we're clear. So good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the next in the series of UHEI webinars, this time on energy and the role it plays in net zero. It's a real pleasure to be here with you today, to learn with you and from you, and I'm delighted that we're joined by a fabulous panel, which is spanning a fascinating variety of sectors. What they all have in common is that they're leaders, practitioners, and in most cases pathfinders at the intersection of sustainability and the built environment, who are going to be sharing their experience and expertise. I also wanted to recognise that there are many familiar faces joining us today. And there's a great deal of expertise and experience across the room, across sectors, functions, progress, and even ambitions. So we hope that we can draw you into the conversation. We're going to consider the role of energy in achieving net zero, and even whether that in itself is ambitious enough. Some of the approaches that people have taken, what's possible, the limitations, and I dare say some of the misadventures we've all had along the way. We'll get to know each other a little before I open the discussion with the panel. Then we'll have a conversation with the panel, and we'll open up to bring the audience into the conversation. So please do start thinking about your questions, start sharing them in the chat. You're very welcome to also feed them to me as a direct message, and I'm happy to ask them for you anonymously if you would prefer. But I'm really keen that we have a conversation, not just between me and the panel, but between the panel themselves and with all of the audience. So as Guy kindly said, I'm Henry Majed, I'm co-founder and CEO of MyMynd, and I'm a visiting fellow at Saïd Business School at the University of Oxford. Some of you might know me from the olden days at Innovation Gateway, which I led before turning my attention to mental health and well-being. I'm a former neurologist who moved into sustainability for the last 10 years and recognised that the health and energy of people is our most vital asset. And to be able to face into the kinds of challenges that you all tackle every single day, we need to be able to protect and enhance this most vital asset. We need to create a really resilient workforce that's better able to flourish and thrive and face into these. And we know that isolation and uncertainty has made us more vulnerable and more likely to burn out. And so I'm desperately keen to share the experiences and the insights from our panel today to understand how we can best take on this challenge around energy and net zero. So today we are joined by Fiona Daly, who's Sustainability and EFM Workforce Lead at NHS England and NHS Improvement, Ian Stenton, who is in Fiona's team as National Programme Manager, Bethany Goodwin, who is Senior Account Manager and NHS Specialist at Inenco, who we thank greatly for sponsoring today's session, and also Gavin Scott, who is Head of Sustainability at the University of Nottingham. So welcome all, thank you for joining us. I am going to say that Fiona is going to need to leave us at around 1 p.m, but Ian is going to stay on. So if you notice Fiona slip away quietly, that will be why. But thank you very much for joining us for as long as you can, Fiona. So the way that we'll do this is I'm going to invite each of our panelists to spend 5 or 10 minutes just introducing where energy and net zero fits in their agenda, what their role is, what some of the challenges have been, and just set us up almost as a stepping off point to start the conversation. So each group, Ian and Fiona together, and then each of the others will discuss where it sits on their agenda. We'll pick up some of those. Then I have some questions that I'm really curious about and have been waiting to put each of them on the spot for days and weeks. So I'll start the conversation and then we'll open up to the floor. And the way we'll do it is we'll take 2 or 3 questions at a time from the audience so that we can make it a conversation, not just a, here's a question, here's an answer, here's a question, here's an answer. So we can really get into the nuances and some of the systemic challenges and what are the forces holding the status quo in place that we need to work together to be able to get around. And I really hope that we're able to leave with some practical ideas that we can put into practice. So hopefully that works for everyone. Any questions that you have, please just share as you go and I will feed them into the discussion. So to kick us off, why don't we start with Ian and Fiona from NHS England and NHS Improvement. So my question to you, my provocation is, where does energy and net zero sit on your agenda? Fiona and Ian.
Okay, thanks, Henry. Yeah, and any of you wondering why I'm leaving at 1, it's because I've had some questions from Henry before that have been slightly tricky. I thought I'd get out of that before we started. Clearly, energy and the role that energy plays in net zero is huge to us. We look after the estate, and energy has a reach that is far beyond the NHS estate. So, you know, if we think about our building energy, the NHS contributes about 5% towards the UK carbon emissions. That's a huge amount. And then you will have seen our carbon footprint, a carbon footprint plus, which is like our direct emissions and indirect emissions, basically scope 1, 2 and 3. And within that, you know, building energy is around 10% of our overall emissions. And that's just kind of what we use and what we consume. But if we think about that big old 60%, every single one of those suppliers also uses energy. Some of those more so than others in manufacturing of, you know, some of our key medical equipment, for example, and medicines, and some of them less so in the service sort of space. But everybody tends to have, less so now post-COVID, but tends to have office space as a sort of minimum. And will do some kind of travel and have energy as part of their lives. And I think that, you know, so for us, the focus on building energy is important. There's something about the fact that we kind of know what we're doing in estates, which is pretty good, I think. There is a bit we don't know, which is the sort of innovation bit. It's the gap. We know what we know, but we don't know what we don't know. I think that recent events have really seen energy bills pushed up. You've seen that in your home bills. It's been widely published on the news. And that's obviously having a knock-on effect, you know, sometimes in a positive way, in the fact that it is building from a commercial perspective a business case which becomes more attractive for things like especially on-site generation. Mainly it has been a slightly negative impact with the sort of cost of living issues. But, you know, I think the point I was trying to make here is that, you know, building energy touches all of our lives. And I think there's been some really stark realizations from people like, you know, oh, so fossil fuels basically generate our electricity in the UK. Yes, in most of the cases they do. In the NHS, we're moving away from that. We're going towards certified renewables, and we're trying to make that sort of step change and then onwards to PPAs and on-site renewables. But I think it's just sort of made that case for people. And I think, you know, for us, really focusing on capital investment is core for us. But also to think about data. I mean, any of you who know me will know that I'm a massive fan of data and getting into the detail of data. I think data really drives decision making, and data in energy is something that we've got. But also about people, you know, how can we use maybe this opportunity in time to engage with people about something that is possibly for most people a relatively dry subject. You know, talking about heat pump replacements doesn't all get everybody going, but you know, I think this could be a really opportune time for us to use that and really pivot the conversation into a new space. So Ian, go on, do you want to add to that?
Yeah, thanks, Fiona. So hi everyone. As Henry said, I'm the National Sustainability Programme Manager in Fiona's team, and we've been spending a lot of last 12 months in bringing the team together and trying to pull together what the messages are for NHS trusts, particularly around the estates and facilities. And a big focus of that is on building energy, because that's where our biggest impact is. I'll just quickly run through the estate's net zero delivery plan for those who haven't seen it. I guess the HE colleagues won't have done. It's currently available on the Collaboration Hub, so any NHS staff can register for that and view it. And that sets out how estates and facilities can help support the national NHS carbon programmes. So it focuses on 6 areas, and they all do touch on energy, some more than others. So we've got a circular economy, which is looking at turning all of our waste into resource. So trying to move out waste from wherever we can in the system. Electrifying the fleet, we do get correspondence from trusts that are worried about electrical capacity with the move to electric vehicles. We're looking at it from an estates and facilities perspective, which is more about that electrical infrastructure, so that'll have a big impact going forward. Engaging the supply chain, like Fiona said, a massive 60% of our carbon emissions come from our supply chain. From the 1st of April, all of our procurement will have to consider social value and carbon, and not above a certain level, but any procurement decision that the NHS makes, which is a massive step change. And we've got commitments from our supply chain to meet our carbon targets, so they'll have to be looking at our energy use. And we've been discussing things like PFI hospitals are technically our supply chain, so there's all sorts of implications for that for energy use. Active travel links again to the electrification of fleet, and then adaptations, one where as we look to prepare our buildings for future predicted weather patterns, we can sort of take out future energy use by planning buildings better. One of the key documents we'll be launching soon is the NHS Net Zero Carbon Healthcare Building Standard, which sets standards for all big construction and refurb projects. And by planning those buildings properly and the retained estate as well, we can ensure that hot or dry summers don't lead to installation of increased air conditioning, so we can take out some future energy peaks and some carbon emissions as well. But the main focus of the delivery plans on investing in our buildings. So the plan's got a 4-step programming, which we're encouraging all NHS trusts to go through. And I did get feedback yesterday, I haven't told Fiona actually, that one of the green plans has got the 4-step programming. Someone from outside of the NHS was reading someone's green plan and was saying they've come up with this great 4-step program, which is in our plans. That's fantastic, and that's really focusing on the low-hanging fruit. So how can you reduce your energy use as much as possible to keep costs down, particularly with the impacts that Fiona's been talking about with the increases in energy costs. Also looking at preparing buildings for electric-led heating. So as we upgrade heating systems, we know that the heating load is as low as possible, which saves energy and saves costs. Step 3 is then that move to away from fossil fuel heating. And this is something that trusts will need to consider now, although the net zero national target is 2040 for net zero for core emissions and 80% reduction between 2028 and 2032. Heating systems are long-term systems that are in for a long time. So if we're going to be working towards an 80% reduction target by 2032 at the latest, all heating systems that are being planned at the moment need to consider that. So step 3 is a key one. And that goes back to what we said about electricity, about electrical capacity and the impacts of moving to electric-led heating. And then step 4, the 4-step program is about on-site renewables. So how you can meet the net of the net zero carbon. So for NHS staff, I'd encourage you to look through the delivery plan if you haven't already. For others, we can send that around. So Guy's got all of our details, and it's a published document. It's just currently on the NHS only site, but it's very much focused around the impact the estates and facilities can have on building and building energy. So that's it for me. Thanks.
Brilliant. Thank you, Ian. Thank you, Fiona, for the introduction. I'm going to hold back the questions that you have incited for me. So next I'm going to ask Beth to come in and just share what energy and net zero means for you and where it fits on the agenda for Inenco.
Thanks, Enlo. I suspect we're going to have some crossover here, and I'll be repeating a few points that you already will have heard from Fiona and Ian, because we're all on the same page with this. So for me, energy is the ultimate root of the net zero problem. So you might be directly burning fuel on site or importing electricity, even transporting items to site or purchasing items. They're all consuming energy during creation. So everything comes back to it at its core. So if we don't solve the problem of energy, we cannot meet net zero. It's just not possible. Everyone knows the scale of the challenge here is huge. And there are businesses and individual organisations with a resistance to getting started because it seems like too big of a problem. Now here at Inenco, we believe in planning and we believe in taking what actions you can as soon as you can. So essentially, the old proverb about eating an elephant one bite at a time really does apply here. To give a quick overview of how big of an issue it is, building energy emissions, they're likely to be about 90% of an acute trust's NHS carbon footprint at the moment. And if you look at market-based reporting and you look for a trust with REGO-backed suppliers, this could reduce to about 80%, which would place the emphasis of the problem onto gas and heating, just as Ian says. It doesn't remove the need to look at optimising electricity usage, though. If anything, it focuses on how important that is, because once you begin to face the challenge of reducing emissions from gas, you'll see just how important your electrical capacity is. So for me, the big question at the moment is gas. We can't decarbonise it in the same way that we are electricity. Renewable sources are generally not zero emissions, and offsetting is only putting the problem off. True green hydrogen is going to be crucial for industries where high temperatures are needed, and potentially on an NHS site, sterilisation systems. But it relies on renewable electricity, which, as Fiona has pointed out, not all of our grid is renewable electricity. It needs that to be surplus to requirements for current electrical needs, and it needs to be zero carbon, and it's less efficient than heating via electricity directly. So it is likely most trusts are going to end up with an electrically based heating system, such as air source heat pumps. And that's going to mean much higher renewable electricity demand through the age distribution networks that we have in the UK. And that does sound all a little bit doom and gloom. So I'm going to circle back to the one bite at a time and just say that whilst trusts and universities do need a long-term plan for decarbonising heat on the estates, you also have to be taking the easier steps now and optimising your usage of your gas and electricity by making your estate as efficient as possible is crucial for reducing the size of your future system. And to become a sustainable healthcare provider or a sustainable education provider, it's reducing your waste. It's reducing your waste energy. So for me, I'm going to give a quick what would I do immediately, which is I'd be identifying what building stock is going to be on your sites in use long term, or for community sites where you've got multiple sites, which ones of those sites are part of your long-term care provision, which aren't, which ones are you going to get rid of? And then work to renovate the ones that you're keeping, the ones that you know are going to be long-term to the highest efficiency possible. And that's got to be your first step. And you just keep one eye on that end goal of the net zero heating system and your electricity import that can prove its renewable credentials, and you go from there. So that's it from me.
Beth, you've stolen one of my questions. The first question I was going to ask is, where do we start? This all sounds fabulous, but what's step 1, 2, 3, or 4 in our 75-stage process for overcoming and outweighing this challenge? So you've sneakily stolen that question from me, but don't worry, the others will get their opportunity as well. So let me hand over to Gavin now to give us the perspective from the University of Nottingham. Gavin.
That's great, thank you, Henry. What's encouraging is a lot of the issues that both Fiona and Bethany have mentioned, and Ian, are transferable across the HE sector. The sector as a whole has been looking at carbon reduction for a number of years, primarily driven in 2010 by the Higher Education Funding Council for England, who had a requirement around carbon reduction. And from Nottingham's perspective, back then we set a 40% reduction target in terms of our scope 1 and scope 2 emissions over that 10-year period. And we were able to meet that relatively easily, partly as a result of the decarbonisation of the power grid, which we've seen a significant advantage, and also a lot of that low-hanging fruit that Beth referred to. So we installed CHPs, albeit now we're beginning to regret some of that CHP installation because of the changes in decarbonisation, lighting projects, large chiller upgrades, controls, fume hubs, as well as PV project. And if we reflect on that, they were very much engineering solutions. So phase 1, very much around engineering. Recently, we've set some new targets, taking a science-based approach, again, just focusing on our scope 1 and scope 2 emissions, which in simple terms mean that by 2030, we need to see a 63% reduction, and by 2040, net zero. And we've put together a hierarchical approach around how we're going to deliver this: demand reduction, energy efficiency, low and zero carbon generation, offsetting. But the university, as with many large organisations, we have some real challenges. And one of those challenges is we have an ageing estate. you know, we have historic lack of investment in our estate, meaning that the transition to particularly decarbonising heat is going to be very costly and time consuming. We've got a whole issue around financing the investment at the moment. You know, we've got competing challenges around investment. We're also, as an organisation, constantly growing, and we're seeing more and more high energy research coming into the university. So it's about balancing that. Another challenge we're going to have is we want to deliver renewables at scale, but we don't often have the land holding, or there isn't the infrastructure in place nearby to be able to support that. One of the things we're trying to get our heads around is, you know, what are the roles of PPAs for us moving forward? And actually, is a PPA a bit of a cop-out? Because it's an opportunity to actually not reduce demand, but actually just, you know, push that carbon burden. And then there's a real piece of work that we need to do around defining what net actually means for us, and what the role of offsetting has. And also we're having conversations around insetting. And for me, perhaps one of the biggest challenges is people. You know, phase one was, you know, delivering through engineering solutions. As we move forward, people are going to be a major part of this. And how do we engage people in what has traditionally been an estates and facilities issue to address? So similarly to others, our actual direct energy emissions are only a very small proportion of our overall emissions. You know, our scope 3 emissions dwarf our energy emissions. And here at Nottingham, we've identified 4 key areas that we're going to try and focus on in terms of our broader emissions. So construction and development, paper use, travel, because as a global university, we're flying tens of thousands of people around the world every year, significant impact. And then food and catering is also something that we've identified. And I think in particular, food and catering, as well as something to target in terms of driving down our emissions, it's something that everybody engages with. So it's a potential tool to reach out for people. So for me, you know, energy does have an important role to play in terms of net zero. It's something really important to the university. We are going to be reporting on our energy emissions and our journey to net zero at the highest level at the university, but we really shouldn't lose sight of the broader carbon impact and the potential we have as organisations and individuals to reduce that. And I think that will be done through projects, policies and people. And I think the people side is the biggest challenge, but also the greatest opportunity for us. How do we engage with our community so that they own the problem, are wanting to help work with us to deliver that change?
Brilliant. Thank you, Gavin. I don't know if you've frozen or stopped. I'm assuming that you have stopped.
I have stopped.
Brilliant. Thank you, Gavin. Guy, are you able to pin Bethany, Ian, Gavin, Fiona and myself? Hopefully you are. Okay, so let's start with the question. So what I'd like to do now is to start a conversation between the panelists and also the audience. Thank you everyone who has started to ask questions in the chat. I've also had a couple that have come through to me privately, so I will ask those on your behalf. But let's get those questions coming, and we'll pick 2 or 3 at a time, and we'll have the conversation between the panelists. And already I'm encouraged because it feels like there's some overlap. It feels like there's some common ground between healthcare and education. So I'd be curious to get the panel just to start off to think about what have been, let's draw out, what are some of the things on the solution landscape? What are some of the levers that we have available? What's been working? And even more than that, what are some of the current gaps, or what are the barriers or blockers that we're seeing to progressing? So we might call it, what are some of the forces holding the status quo in place? And some of that could be language, some of that could be targets, as have come through the questions. So let's just start to have that conversation about what are you seeing working, what are you seeing holding us back? We'll kick us off.
Yeah, I don't mind.
Okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think, so the things that are working, I think basically everybody's engaged now. I know that certainly some of the people on this call have been doing this job for a long time. And, you know, it was like pushing at a locked door with a piano behind it. you know, and you'd have to sort of climb out the window and go in the other side just to get somebody to listen to you. And now it's almost like we're being pushed through the door, asked to go faster, further, quicker, you know, and do so much more. So I think, you know, but one of the successful things has been the narrative, for a whole load of reasons, but around climate change, the importance of addressing it, and the urgency that I think we've got to address it. And you know, I think that that's been really helpful. I think some of the specific stuff has been good as well. You know, we've had a lot of investment. I can see the chat coming up down the side, which I should ignore slightly, but the PSDS funding has been, you know, great, because actually we've got capital investments. So that's public sector decarbonisation scheme. Funding has been really good to kick start some of this stuff, but we know that we need to go further. And we know that we need to change the narrative with people like the finance sector, and certainly, I mean, Ian's been doing a lot of work with the NHS and the finance directors, and you know, I think that's really good. But I do also think that there's still this sort of moral versus, you know, business sort of dichotomy, even though everybody's bought into it a lot more. I think still, when pen hits paper, you know, when you start to talk about cost uplifts or no payback for certain things, it's like, oh, well, can we just not do that bit and just do all the nice things? So that for me would be my initial reflections.
Any others?
Yeah,
Bethany?
very quick from me, just to note, not in on the PSDS side, and the funding that's been available. I think it's been a real game changer from my perspective. We've seen trusts and other sort of public sector clients who would normally not have been engaged at all with what they were going to do project wise over the next few years, suddenly coming to us and coming to others and saying, help, we need something we can put in. We need something that's a project that we can actually get going on this, and we can do it because the money's there, and let's not waste that opportunity. But also the focus on the skills side of it for me was huge. So the skills funding was the thing that I saw the most value out of, as strategizing. Trusts getting actually together and going, what are we going to do? How are we going to fix this problem? The whole problem, not just let's throw some money at a project and get it done, but also let's think about the big picture.
Great. Gavin, would you add anything?
Yeah, I think particularly relating to PSDS, what I'd really like to see is, you know, these grants available in more of a timely manner. You know, a couple of them where pretty much lastminute.com. And I know that there was quite a lot of unrest within the HE sector just around that whole process and the approach that was taken. And I think around the narrative, I think as professionals, we have something to do around, you know, our narrative in relation to business cases, because quite a lot of this funding isn't going to get funding explicitly just based on carbon. It's about telling the much bigger story, and we're doing that more and more within the university. And that, you know, almost whilst we're driving it from a carbon perspective, we're almost portraying well, this enhances the student experience, and it delivers carbon benefit as well. So I think there's a changing skill set that we need to tell that story.
Brilliant, thank you. So I'm going to touch on some of the points that you've just made. So it feels like it's on the landscape now. It's part of the agenda where, you know, it's moved up to the boardroom and the C-suite, and it's gone through all of the operations. And that means that there's a lot of attention on us. It means often also that there's a lot of pressure on us. There's a lot of expectation on us. And some of the people are asking the questions, what are the targets we're setting? I think some of you have mentioned science-based targets, for example. So how do we, let's get into the detail now, level with me. How do we get beyond well-intentioned box ticking to really drive impact at scale? What are the barriers? What are things that are holding us back, and what are we doing about them? Or what are the gaps that we together in this group can try to do and learn together to be able to move forward? How do we get beyond the good intentions?
I'll jump in, and it leads on from Beth's point in the last question, to be honest, about the future collaboration. I know Abby's put a question in there, and with the NHS, just for the benefit of HE colleagues, we're moving to an integrated care system model, so that at a sub-regional level, trusts will be working much closer together. That will involve sub-regional green plans, so how you're going to get to your net zero targets and national targets. It will lead to sub-regional estate strategies, so which are the core buildings that will be delivered or be kept going forward, where's the opportunities for movement, and which buildings are probably surplus to requirement or so unsuitable for future health models of care that they'll be looked at. And I think that will bring loads of opportunities for future collaboration, that the ICSs or the care systems, they've got lots of people at lots of different stages, and some trusts will be leaders, or some will be small primary care groups that are trying to work together, like just some GP practices. And I think to have that really close cohort of people working together, all working for the same target, because although Gavin said like University of Nottingham set a target, we're luckier in the NHS that it's been set nationally, so we all know what we need to work towards. I think that future collaboration and people getting together and there being sub-regional directors of estates and then regional directors, and Lou put the question in about the green NHS, so there'll be ICS green leads and regional teams. So we've got a massive opportunity that instead of it just being a small national team and then lots of individual NHS trusts, there's this collaboration built into the system from this year going forward. I think that'll make a massive difference.
Yeah, and just I suppose building on that from my perspective, I think there's more collaboration that can be done between universities and hospitals. You know, very often geographically they're close to one another. They have links through the teaching. In particular, you know, here at Nottingham, we effectively own a quarter of the main hospital here. We need to collaborate more with the trust. We are literally next to one another across a main road, but yeah, I think there's huge opportunities to collaborate across both HE and the NHS.
Yeah, not to be the negative Nelly in the room, I am going to talk a little bit about challenge here, because we're all talking about the collaboration, and the collaboration increases is fantastic, but at the ground level, I think we do still have an issue here. And certainly over the last 6 months, when I'm talking to people, I'm seeing higher and higher stress levels with energy managers. I'm seeing higher and higher levels of people working overtime. And I know the NHS always works long hours, but there are people working sort of through their holiday periods here and not taking their holidays. And what I am seeing is an element of burnout. And particularly a number of our key staff in this who've been bashing at that door that we talked about earlier for years and years are actually close to retirement at this point. And there isn't necessarily a succession plan coming through at individual organisations for how we're going to fill those gaps. So for me, that's one of the key things that's on my mind at the moment, is looking at the network. And I have seen some talented people leaving the NHS, leaving the public sector, going to work for consultancies like my consultancy, because we have closer job descriptions, tighter job descriptions. We know what we're going to do on a day-to-day basis. So I do think that's a big challenge that we need to overcome. We need more personnel, and we need to keep those that we've got.
And it's also, for me, reflecting on what the skills we need for the future. You know, the disruptors, inquisitive people, collaborators aren't necessarily the skills that we currently have, certainly within my team here at Nottingham. And there's a piece to be done around skills for the future. How do we support the transition and development of the current staff to enable them to do their jobs better and to deliver our ambition?
Sorry, Henry, could I just make a quick shameless plug? As part of the National Estates and Facilities team, we got funding this year to start 2 net zero energy officer apprentices. So they're funded centrally, but they'll be based in Leeds Hospital and Northampton Hospital, and Libby and Claire will be managing them. And we've got some, we're hoping to get some more funding going forward, but there's been a number of trusts who are looking at that model and whether they've got a band 3, so almost entry level role that goes through a 2-year apprentice to try and bring in that pipeline that Bethany was talking about. So anyone who's interested in that, drop me a line, please.
Well plugged, Ian. Got in there. Okay, so I think we've heard some of the challenges. We need to build up the leadership capabilities. We've recognised that we're working in a very different environment, and there are lots of leadership lessons that we have drawn out on well-being and the future of work, which is an area that's really close to my heart. And perhaps in a moment we can talk about some of the things that are happening inside organisations. We have been working with the NHS England and Improvement Estates team using MyMynd, so we can share some of the insights and learnings from there that might apply across different industry sectors. But I want to first just pick up on a couple of points that Gavin and Bethany and Ian made, and particularly thinking about the opportunities to collaborate. So we've thought about how we get beyond well-intentioned box ticking. We recognise there is a need, requirement for us to have any kind of chance of making real progress and impact at scale is going to require collaboration. What are I will get this question in despite Bethany stealing my thunder earlier. What are the practical next steps? Where can we start? What can we do right now? Either right down on a practical level, there might be a specific project or general themes, general ideas. What can we be doing right now to foster and cultivate conversation in today's webinar that we're able to go away and reflect on next week and say, actually, we've done something differently. We've changed the way that we think. We've learned, we've discovered, we've evolved as a result of this discussion. One of our ambitions from this webinar is to give people really practical tools and things that they can do. So where can we start right now? What are steps 1, 2, and 3 for collaborating or driving collaboration across healthcare and education? And the other thing that I'm going to remind the audience or invite the audience to do is, as we're having the conversation, please do share in the chat or share with me privately, where are the things you agree with? What do you violently agree with that Gavin has said? Or what do you disagree with? What do you think is simply wrong? What is different about your situation? Why might you disagree? Why might others disagree? Let's start to surface some of those barriers. We don't want to hold any of these things. We don't want people to be walking away thinking, that was a really interesting conversation, but actually I'm different. We're completely different because. Let's try and surface some of those things so we can understand if there really is a difference there or where there might be common ground and we can benefit from different perspectives to really make a difference. So, I'm going to invite Ian, Bethany and Gavin just to talk about anything practically that we can be doing to drive this collaboration right now, right down to even specific projects that we might be able to invite others to be involved in.
If it's all right, I'll jump in as a very quick one first, which is, from my perspective, one of the best things I see is when we're able to share knowledge. And that is at the core of collaboration, is sharing what we've done well, sharing what's gone wrong. And some of the trusts that I work with are part of an energy group, and they've been doing this for years. They've been getting together and talking about what works well, talking about what doesn't work well. I think we need to see that expand into the ICS structure. And what I would love to see is your ICS leads having a structured group with all of the sustainability personnel from all of the trusts in your area, all getting together to share best practice and to share, and that could be set up really quickly. And there are simple things that individual trusts are doing which are standout, which are absolutely brilliant, and every trust could be learning from.
How do we do that?
Well, there are people in post now at most ICSs who are going to be your sustainability leads. And what I would say is I would reach out to that individual and ask the question and say, what are we going to do as a group?
What can we learn? I mean, there's as Fiona said, you don't know what you don't know. And there's so much, we all share. I know from my world, the work I do at the business school in Oxford, that too often we come in and we think about the differences and why things aren't going to work, rather than often thinking about where is that common ground. And too often people will say, well, actually, I'm completely different to you because I'm a hospital, or I'm an NHS trust and I do this, and someone else will say, well, we're completely different because we educate leaders, or we're completely different because we build motor cars or we bake bread. But it turns out that these are all boxes full of people who need to be nourished and flourished and enabled to thrive, and there really is a lot of common ground, and these are all boxes that need to be heated or cooled or the waste managed, and I'm sure there could be more. But I want to try and get into the detail. You're not off the hook yet. I hope over this conversation we can think about some really practical things that we can go away and say, we're doing right now. What are we going to do today? What are we going to do tomorrow? What are we going to do after this conversation?
From my perspective, Henry, we are in the process of just reaching out to our nearby trust and saying, come on, let's sit around the table. Let's really understand our ambitions, our challenges and our potentials for collaboration. So, for me, that's a really practical starting point, and making sure we're doing that at the right level so that we actually understand, and then just following that up consistently. Because as a sector, we often we share best practice across universities through various groups and communities of practice. We just need to try and broaden that and bring more of the public sector together. Because you're right, the problems we're facing aren't unique. aren't unique to us, aren't unique to the sector.
Okay, so sorry, go ahead.
It's going to be practical. So my first presentation for UHEI a couple of years ago was about the Liverpool Knowledge Quarter Sustainability Network. So before I started in the central team, I was head of sustainability at Liverpool Hospitals, and I used to attend the University Sustainability Board, and their sustainability lead used to attend mine. And we're like, there's loads of good stuff going on, but I know that there's other things happening. So we set up a Knowledge Quarter network where we literally just wrote to anyone in the area, said we were going to get together for quarterly meetings just to talk about what everyone was doing, energy, travel, waste. And we ended up with the three Liverpool hospitals, three Liverpool universities on the group, and the local orchestra and the theatre. So it was mostly public sector, a bit of charity organisations, and we just met every quarter. So one person would book one of their meeting rooms, everyone would turn up, we'd talk about what was going on, and then we'd break up again. I know Newcastle have set up something similar, and when I was at the UHEI conference talking about it, one of the questions was like, where do you get the funding for it? And it was literally, you book a meeting room, whoever's hosting it goes to M&S and buys some biscuits, and you try and order some tea. There was no cash involved at all, but we got loads of great stuff from there. And I think that's a really practical step, particularly for city centre based trusts where you're near higher education. You can just make the call. They'll all, like Gavin knows, they'll all have sustainability leads. Big NHS trusts have sustainability leads, and they've got loads in common.
Brilliant, thank you. So I'm actually going to invite people to start commenting on how do you, if you're in the education sector, how should the people from the healthcare sector reach out to you? What will make you most receptive? What do you want to hear about? What do you want to share? What do you have that others don't know about? And equally, if you're in the healthcare sector, share what will make a approach really appealing or desirable. How can you what can people do to make it likely that you will engage with them? What are the problems that you're having? What do you want to learn? I can already see Katrin has shared what are some of the specific things that trusts have done which have been really successful so far. And let's not limit it to trust. Let's think about education as well. And Bethany, perhaps you can share some of the things that you have seen that have been successful, but not just successful, but let's also think about what are the things that haven't quite worked out the way that we intended them to, and what were the reasons they didn't work out? Where did they fall short, and what would we do differently? So why don't we take this in as one of the angles that we can use to draw out these the common ground and the overlap. So what are some of the things that have been successful? What made them successful? And what are some things that were perhaps misadventures and didn't work out the way that we expected them to?
No one's going to admit to a misadventure, I guess. I think one of the things we're trying to do, in the national team now, we've got an innovations lead who's trying to work with trusts or ICSs or just directly with industry to look at bringing things new. So it could be something that's already in a trust but isn't widespread, or that's in a different industry and not in the NHS, or that's new to the whole system. And one of the reasons we're trying to do that is because I know there's so much duplication that goes on with organisations contacting the trust to say we've got this amazing great scheme. The last one I got caught in Liverpool, they rang up to say that they've been speaking to Fiona Daly, and she'd said that Liverpool's a leader and we must look at this. And you think, oh crikey, I better do that. And then 3 months down the line, it turns out to be a non-starter, and they met her once for 10 minutes at a conference. So we're trying to take this national innovations programme so that if one trust is doing something great, we can try and take that into a case study and say this has worked really well here, or we've looked at something and it hasn't worked quite so well. Just to try and take some of that burden off trusts, because there's people going through the same thing over and over again. And if it works well, we need to shout about it as quickly as possible and get it rolled out. If it doesn't work well, we need to understand why and perhaps let other people know.
Yeah, there's a lot we can learn from the university sector. Now, at my previous life, most of you are aware of this, I used to work in building management systems. So I worked with a lot of universities, and universities are a long way further forward than the NHS with BMS. Systems within the NHS are generally quite out of date. But there are some fantastic lessons learned there where there have been test cases of integrating different systems, having room booking systems, having PIRs that automatically turn on or off the heating and cooling to a room for comfort conditions. There is some really simple optimization work that could be done there, where all we really need to do is port across a specification that a university has and say we should apply this and find the funding to do it.
Okay, and Gavin, is there anything that you can share that has worked really well, and also why? What was it uniquely about that meant it was really effective? Or if you're brave enough and willing, some of the things that have been more challenging and that you might discourage others to do, because we need to be vulnerable. We need to be willing to take these risks. We're not going to status quo our way out of the problem that we have. We're going to need to innovate and to try to de-risk together and share, democratize the knowledge out there. So Kevin, what would you be
I'll start with a positive, and that has been some work we've done around engagement and gamification of positive sustainability behaviour. So we've developed a platform in collaboration with another organisation, and also in collaboration with Nottingham University within the city here. And we've recently broadened that out across the local authorities and are talking to the trust. So there's an element of collective gamification, competition. Where things haven't particularly worked well is where we find ourselves in the need for a solution now. But actually, we've got this carbon ambition, and so we've got a live example with our district heating system. We need a solution now. It's failing. People are cold in buildings, but actually we've got a long-term vision, and actually the initial solution now delivers our need now. But it's about that making sure that we're trying to future-proof, and that's one of the big challenges. And we don't always get it right. And I often think you can learn more from other people when they tell you when you've got things wrong.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we do something. I've seen something, and I've seen it work. Sometimes the language is quite colourful, but we talk about whales and daisies, and whales are all of the fantastic, fabulous, good news, the things that you've done really well, and you recognise what went well, and you celebrate that, and you cascade all of that knowledge out. But then the daisies are the learning opportunities. These are the mistakes that we made, and it's like skiing. We were talking about skiing a little earlier, and you only really learn to ski by falling over hundreds of times or thousands of times. And the more you fall over, the more you learn, and the more capable and skilled you become. So I wonder, what are some of the barriers do you feel right now? And this might also move into some of the conversation around burnout and psychological safety and vulnerability. What are some of the barriers to people and organizations being willing to be vulnerable and share the things that haven't necessarily worked out as well? Is it the short-term thinking? Is it vulnerability of the role, perception of judgment of being able to do the job? What are some of the things that are holding us back from sharing that knowledge? And also something that doesn't work. Very often we'll hear something doesn't work within education, but actually it could work brilliantly within the healthcare sector, or vice versa. Just because something hasn't played out or hasn't seen the return you expected in one setting, it's very much context dependent, and it may work very differently, or we can take those learnings and make it work in a different setting. So what do you think is holding us back?
I think for me, it's around culture. There's an element of culture, and creating work environments where it's actually okay to get things wrong. And as long as we're learning from it, and I think the other element is, staff are blooming busy. You don't often have the time at the end of the project to spend, a day reflecting and going through the process, because you're on to the next project and you're having to deliver that. So for me, it's around culture and resource.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
Would
you agree with that, Ian?
Yeah, I definitely would. I think it is the two things. One is, I guess, that the majority of energy reduction projects cost money, even if they save more money in the long run. So, the old adage where you just do something until you get found out, and if it worked well, you tell everybody. If it didn't, you just don't tell anyone. You can't really do that if you're having to ask for money to invest in something. And the other part is the culture, and what happens if you see what's come out recently regarding the trusts that have been using Gazprom. That was through an official framework that is using a gas company that's approved by Ofgem to provide gas. But trusts were really getting that in the neck as if they'd made a wrong choice to support a dictator. And I think it's the same with energy prices going up. I know energy managers are under loads of pressure from the finance teams about why the costs going up, which is outside of their hands. And I think the more challenge you get when anything negative happens, the less likely you are to feel confident to be able to try new things and not worry about getting them wrong, because when things haven't gone right recently, people have been under pressure to explain why.
Yeah, I actually think we also don't monitor very well. So historically, we didn't know what projects worked and which didn't. And you would have certain trusts where you'd go into an energy project, but you actually would have no way of measuring whether it delivered what you'd been promised. And there are unscrupulous companies out there. There are companies who will promise you savings that are not going to happen. And they will find a way to manipulate figures to make it look as though a project is going to deliver more than it is. And we've seen this a lot. And often we end up doing sort of a double check on people's proposals in situations like this of what is this individual company proposing and is it actually true? But energy managers don't always have the time to do that level of rigorous checking on a company's proposal. They'll assume it's correct, and they don't always have the tools to analyse the data afterwards to check whether it was correct or any pushback on the external firm.
Great. And I can see that there have been a couple of polls in the chat already. So I would be keen for anyone who answered. So the first one, how confident are you that your trust or campus can achieve the 2040 net zero target? For those of you who answered extremely confident, perhaps you might comment either privately or openly in the chat for what makes you so confident. And for those who are somewhat not confident, also you might share what is it that you feel is holding us back? Where are the gaps? And again, you're very welcome to just reach out to me privately for me to share on your behalf. And similarly, for the do you trust your campus or company to have the data to measure its progress against its plan? For those of you who say not really, or yes, but with some gaps, perhaps you might share what those gaps are, or where are the areas that we need to cover those gaps. So I'll pick up the people element. So we've been talking about failure and this fear of failure and willingness to be vulnerable. And one of the things that we've seen at MyMynd is that we're all purpose driven, we're mission led, and that means that we're placing a great deal of pressure and expectation on ourselves. And we really couldn't be more relevant and more important right now in the organizations that we're in. And the two sectors that are represented the most here are perhaps those who are most on the front line, and conveniently also the ones that we have the most experience of working with. And what we're seeing is that people are feeling isolated. Social relationships are impacted. We're not in a meeting room together in the way that we used to be. Sometimes someone from the NHS said to me, it doesn't feel like we're working from home, it feels like we're living at work. And it means that this isolation and this uncertainty means that we don't have the connection. It means we're not building that trust in the way that we used to. And that means that we're more nervous about sharing the failures, or when we're uncertain, we're less comfortable asking someone, what do you think? What can we do differently? What can we learn? Equally, we've seen that hope has been impacted. We've seen that we thought things would get better, and it turns out things did get better, but not in the way that we expected. We've gone into this hybrid way of working, which means that some people are often on video calls, some people are in person. We need to learn. I had the experience myself. It blew my mind, I think, the day before yesterday, because I had to commute somewhere. I'd forgotten that time I used to get between meetings was time I'd be able to do my follow-ups or make those calls. And I couldn't do that because I was in the car going from one meeting to the next. But how do we face into this? How do we meet each other at work? Do we bow? Do we hug? Do we shake hands? Do we wave from a distance? Are we in a meeting room? Do we sit outside? This is all creating tension and difficulty for us. So hope has been impacted, and we've seen that at a really high level across every sector that we're working with, and particularly across education and healthcare. And the other thing that we've really seen that's interesting is leadership. We've seen that our ability to adapt and face into these challenges in the way that we used to aren't as effective. Coping strategies that used to work aren't as effective now because we don't have the environment. We don't have the culture necessarily. We're feeling a lot more vulnerable. And the two things that we've seen that are really relevant to the conversation today is that for purpose-driven individuals, particularly sustainability, energy, etc., you're doing this because you care. We're seeing that personal standards are really high, through the roof. I think in education and in healthcare, we saw over 99% of people were striving for excellence, almost to beyond all expectations, beyond imaginable high expectations for everyone across this group. But what we also saw that was really challenging was extremely high self-criticism. What this means is that we hold ourselves to account to a very high level. It means when someone says, can you just do one more meeting, one more presentation, one more report, you're going to say yes. And the reason you say yes is because you care. It matters. The mission matters. It means that you will, it means your team is more important. Your colleagues are more important. Your staff are more important. Your clients are more important. Your students are more important. Your academic staff are more important. Your patients are more important. And that means that we're more likely to be vulnerable, more likely to burn out. We're taking more and more on. And you know, one of the sayings that people sometimes mock me for repeating and using, two of them, in fact, are one, you know, it's really important that we put our own oxygen mask on first before we try and help other people, and particularly within these sectors. And the other one is that, you know, our success is really driven by our ability to recharge, not by our ability to endure. And when we're thinking about the kinds of challenges that we're dealing with around energy and net zero, we're thinking about challenges we're not going to solve on our own. We need to be able to collaborate. We need to be able to innovate. But to collaborate and to innovate, we need to feel safe. We need to feel psychologically safe. We need to feel not vulnerable. We need to be willing to take some of those risks. We need to be able to move beyond that that status quo to work in a different way. You know, all of the numbers are there, and so I have a question to open up to the panel and also the audience to share what your experience has been. Is, you know, what can we do to create that environment and create that culture and enable people to be sharing effectively and collaborating and innovating, and you know, really to have a chance to face into these challenges, and not just climate impact. You know, there are, you know, not just pandemics, not just climate impact, there's biodiversity loss, there's data security, there's gender inequality, racial injustice, diversity and inclusion. All of these things are really big challenges that we need to be able to work in a different way. So perhaps you might just comment on, you know, how you're facing into that, and if you feel that we're making good progress, what's working, what do we need to do differently?
I'd be really pleased to jump in first on this, if that's all right, Henry, which is, and I'll share an anecdote from my time at university because I think it's relevant to most of the people on the call. Most of the people here have chosen a career in sustainability. Now, choosing a career in sustainability at the time when we chose it was sort of a masochistic approach. You go into this knowing that you're going to come out depressed. And that was the first day, the first lecture of my undergraduate degree, which was environment, economics and ecology. They sat us down and they said, look, at the end of this degree, you will be feeling depressed and you will need some emotional support. And they sat everyone down and had that conversation of 18-year-olds going into this career, that this is going to be hard, and choose it if you want to choose it. So I think most people here have chosen it as a passion. They've chosen it because we care. And I think as I've grown older, the thing that I've learned is how important it is to have the barriers. So I do work for a high pressure job. I work in an environment where I do sometimes have to work long hours, but I keep track of my hours and I make absolutely sure that I'm not doing more than 45 a week ever. And I have that as a hard limit, as a look, I will stop because I know for my own health, I have to be able to do this next week and the week after and the week after that. And I think more people need to put those boundaries in place for themselves.
Cool. Ian, Gavin?
Yeah, I mean, I've noticed it from starting this job in June that I've been exclusively working from home, whereas when I was in the trust, it was more hybrid, so you do get to see people. And I think one of the things I most struggle with now is that Teams meetings are very transactional. You only have half an hour or an hour. You're there to talk about what you're there to talk about, and that chit chat about holidays or how people are feeling really goes. And I've been monitoring my diary, like for all of January, I had between 1 and 3 hours a day where I wasn't in meetings. That was to deal with all the emails to come through, actually to do a job, and then to go to loads of meetings. And when the meetings are transactional, you can go from 9 till 5 and you've just had half an hour to throw a sandwich down your neck, and you haven't really achieved anything in the day that's done. On the plus side, though, I think for some roles, it's probably not applicable so much to NHS trusts or universities, but it does mean that you can be anywhere in the country and you can employ the best people rather than whoever lives closest and is the best. So that's been fantastic. And as our team's grown, we're all over the country. And I imagine 5 years ago, we would have all been people who were based in London. or perhaps Leeds. So it opens up opportunities, but I think the social water cooler chat has obviously vanished, and that's I think one of the things from being exclusively online that it's difficult to deal with. I know a lot of university staff are still exclusively working at home as well.
Yeah, we're seeing a lot of these challenges, through this hybrid working. There is an opportunity. It does unlock the ability to work remotely anywhere in the world. I think we have people in 3 different continents working at MyMynd, and that's fabulous. We need to negotiate some timings, some common timings, but it does also create its challenges. It's not the solution. And as you say, for these kinds of problems, it's really important that we're building bridges, not walls, and we build walls when we feel that we are isolated or not able to connect. And one of the things that's really important is how do we build trust? First, you need to build trust, and to build that trust, you need to have that affinity. You need the common language. You need to be able to create that, create shared value. And more often than not, we're talking about the same thing, but using different words or different language. And that applies to whether it's climate impact, energy, net zero. The day someone can actually give me a glossary for what all of these things mean, I'm a professor at the Business School in Oxford, will be a brilliant day and will change my world. But creating that common language, creating that common understanding, thinking about how we can look after ourselves. Gavin, how have you been experiencing it?
Yeah, well, I think for me, it's always really important to remember that we just haven't been working away from the office. We've been working away from the office under a global pandemic, and that's subtly different. From my perspective, I'm keen to get more people on site. We've spent the last 2 years trying to build relationships when we're asking for something. You on Teams, you don't just drop a colleague a Teams call just to have a chat, whereas you build that relationship at the water fountain, walking through the corridor, and also reflecting and making sure that teams and people are protecting time. I will block out large sections of my diary just because I don't want anybody to send me a Teams appointment. I actually want to do some work rather than talk about doing work. And the other bit for me is around, as teams, developing your own rules around how we work, how we collaborate with one another, how we integrate. Because here at Nottingham, we often don't get the rules from the top, and sometimes we actually want that stringent guidance where it's devolved for us to develop. So we need to do more in that. And also is making sure we're always reflecting personal needs versus business needs, because fundamentally it will at times come down to actually you may prefer being at home because you don't have to commute, but actually the business needs you on site because you can't do your job sat at home not observing what's going on. So some of that comes down to trust and developing shared understanding of rules.
Right, so communication, alignment, creating shared value, understanding that we've all experienced this situation in different ways, and particularly for the kinds of roles. I see familiar faces in the list of attendees here, and I have a high-level understanding of what your roles are. Really, these are really tough roles, even without all of the things happening around us. These are really difficult. And there's even more scrutiny now. There's even more expectation from you. And that means that, we need to recognize that we're all experiencing this situation in different ways. We all have different needs. We used to all have a job. Sometimes some of us had 2 jobs, but now we have 5 because we're doing all of the things that we've always done without the usual boundaries that we used to have. And we're caring for young children and elderly parents and a vulnerable team. And that makes it really difficult. And we do need to be forgiving on ourselves. And, I remind us putting our own oxygen mask on first before we try to help others, and not trying to endure but to recharge. So we're coming to the end of the session now, so hopefully we've been able to give you some practical ideas of things that our colleagues in the panel have been doing inside universities and in healthcare. We've had some of the reflections and perspectives from the audience as well to bring into that conversation. Hopefully we've been able to reflect those. If anyone has any questions that we haven't been able to cover yet or that we've missed, please do just drop them to us, to myself separately, and I will ensure that the relevant panelists or myself follow up with you directly. I'm going to now invite each of the panelists just to give us a parting reflection. What's the key thing that you have either taken out through this conversation, or the parting reflection that you would want to leave everyone with? And that could be something that you have referenced, it could be something you've heard, it could be something that you feel that we haven't covered. So I'm going to invite perhaps Ian to go first, and then Bethany, and then over to you, Gavin, before we wrap up. So Ian.
Okay, so thanks very much. It's been great to be part of the panel, and there are a couple of specific questions in the chat. So if people either email me or email Henry or pass it on, I can sort those out. The thing that stuck with me was Gavin saying that people haven't just been working from home, but we've been working through a pandemic, and the impacts on students throughout COVID and the impacts on the NHS through increased patient numbers have been immense. And then we were also talking about the pressures that energy managers and sustainability leads are under, with the desire to do excellence and the pressures to deliver. So I think my takeaway is for us to be a bit easier on ourselves, that energy prices continue to go up. It's a difficult position at the moment. The net zero carbon targets get closer, and I get a better understanding of them more and more. But everyone on this call is doing the hardest and doing the best, and we need to maybe just reflect on that and celebrate some of the great stuff rather than worrying too much about what details we've got or where the gaps are.
Brilliant, thank you. Bethany.
I'm going to go with, for me, to sum up, it would be plan, collaborate, but act. And as a sort of subtitle to that, I would say don't be afraid to steal from each other. And that's in the best way possible. There are green plans being published by every NHS trust. They should be up on all of the websites. Go and read them. Other people have been shouting about what they're doing well, and I know they're also telling NHS England, and some of the case studies are coming out, but go and steal from your colleagues. You don't have to reinvent the wheel.
Steal with pride.
Yes, absolutely.
Gavin.
For me, it would be never underestimate the value of people, relationships, and collaboration, and focus on the controllables. You know, we've touched a little bit on the cost of energy. You know, I've stopped discussing pound notes when it comes to energy. I can't control that. That's the market. I can control the kilowatt hours.
Steal with pride. Control the controllable, not the others. Collaborate, share, break it open. We're in this together. It's the most unprecedented of unprecedented times. We have a real opportunity to make a difference right now. And I really believe in the power of many and the power of collaboration, but we do need to look after ourselves and each other. We need to lead ourselves, lead others, lead other leaders. We need to put our own oxygen mask on before we can help others. We need to recharge, not just endure. I want to thank Guy for pulling this group together, for setting the agenda and allowing us to have this, what certainly for me has been a really nourishing, powerful and also encouraging. I'm optimistic about what we're able to do together. There's definitely a willingness to share and to learn together. Anyone who wishes to follow up with any of the panel, you are very welcome to. You're very welcome to contact any of us, anyone who, anything that we can share from MyMynd around the leadership lessons and how we can create a more resilient workforce and face into these challenges, and to share the data and the insights that we've been drawing from industry leaders around the world. We've had over 1 million people coming through MyMynd, and so we're very keen to share all of those learnings. We don't want to hold anything back. It's really important that we're in this together. So join me please in thanking each of the panelists today. Fiona in absentia, Ian, Bethany, Gavin. Thank you, Guy, for bringing this group together, and most of all, thank you all for joining us today, sharing your experience and expertise, sharing your questions, and going on to do all of the important roles that you do. Thank you. Guy, back to you.
Great, thanks Henry, and thanks everyone again for joining in. Thanks for the speakers. If it wasn't for you guys, we wouldn't be here. But looking forward to hopefully seeing everyone at another UHCI webinar, or maybe attend the face-to-face conference in London on the 29th of June. Hopefully, fingers crossed, at Chelsea Football Club. But if anybody wants to, well, the agenda will be out on that next week, and I'll let everyone have a look at that. And then there's also the main event in Birmingham on the 15th and 16th of November. But and then finally we've got an event in Scotland, which is on the 27th of April. But yeah, I'll send out more details and everything, and hopefully see you all. And thanks very much, Inenco, for supporting us, and Beth, and maybe you can all come and see Beth at the face-to-face conference. Have a catch up with Beth there. But yeah, thanks Ian, Gavin, Henry, and finally Beth for being here, and Fiona. So thanks everybody. Hope you all have a good day. Cheers.
Best wishes.
Bye-bye.
Take care, everyone. Bye bye.
Cheers, Henry.